Hello, and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I'm George. Today, we're going to tackle the Ork Kommandos out of the Warhammer 40k Kill Team Octarius box set. Should be pretty cool. Let's check it out. Here are our Orky friends, the Ork Kommandos, and they look spectacular. It was a really nice build. It was fun. It was a little finicky, but it was okay. I usually hate these little wires connecting the gun to other parts of the model, but they weren't so bad. I think it's because I went ahead and glued everything together before I painted. And so that is very, very helpful, I have found. It's going to increase the difficulty in painting the model, of course, so it's kind of a give and take, right? You either build it right or you paint it right. You can't do both with complicated models like these. But there was a really nice selection of parts. There's a really nice selection of varieties of orc dudes that you can create. It's really fun. There's not a lot of posability, but you know, you can have your little tweaks here and there. And once I'm done painting, I'm going to go ahead and add some extra stuff, like there's holsters and pouches and other grenades and stuff like that. I'll add that once I'm done painting, or at least when I'm really, really close to being done painting. So I've got a couple of dudes. I'm going to start showing them off a little bit. So we've got the Commando Knob. I think he's the sergeant. He's the only one wearing like a baseball cap. He's got this power claw thing, and he's got like a bolt pistol with a scope on it for some reason. He's also got this little comm thing on his pretty complicated backpack, and there's an extra grenade in there. And he's the only one standing on a piece of terrain, which is kind of cool. Yeah, he's got a lot of stuff going on. He's got plenty of charm. Really like the way he looks. We've got this guy, the Commando Slasher Boy. And you know he's a Slasher Boy because he's got two slashes, I guess, two choppas, two knives. And he's even got one clenched in his mouth, which I think is a really cool little touch. Couple of grenade canisters, a backpack. He's a sweet-looking model, looking to be close up and personal. A lot of these orcs have this little pouch on their shoulder, which reminds me of way back in the day when I had some bad habits, and it was like the cool kids would roll up a pack of a tobacco delivery device in their shirt sleeves like this. That's what this reminds me of. But it's nice, it's a really nice touch. I like the way this guy looks. We have a Commando Rocket Boy with the rockets right there. He's got a little detail here on the shoulder. It looks like an explosion. He's got his own little backpack. We've got this Commando Sniper Boy with his long, I don't know, sniper rifle. I don't know if it's a bolter variant, but you know, it's a sniper rifle because it's got a scope on it. One of the other little details that I really, really like about these models is that all their faces are different. They're wearing these kind of masks, and they're going to be a pain to paint, but they look really, really cool. Plenty of ammo on this guy, too. He can shoot all day. We've got the Commando Comms Boy, which he has a pistol that looks like it's a radio thing. I don't know if it's a special weapon or if it's just like an antenna, a directional antenna. I don't know. So he's supposed to be the communications guy, but I don't know how it works. I haven't played Kill Team, but he looks awesome. Love his headgear. We have just a normal run-of-the-mill Commando Boy. He's, I guess, the normal troop type for this game. And he's got a little SMG. I think it's a pistol, but it's got a little full mounted brace on it. And it's supposed to be kind of flush with the gun. But I decided to tweak it a little bit to make it look like, well, like how an orc would use a shoulder brace, which is not at all. It's a little floppy. It's up in the air. I don't know, I think it gives him a dynamic pose. Maybe it's just weird. Who knows? But that's the way I went with it. He's got a big old axe on him too. We've got a Commando Breacher Boy. I'm not exactly sure what that weapon is. It looks like a battering ram. I don't know what impact it has on the game, but it looked really cool, so that's what I went with. There was an option between this guy and just a normal Commando Boy, but no. It had to have that cool looking ram thing. And he's got like this can. I'm guessing it's a pressure vessel to operate the piston on this battering ram. He's got a big old sledgehammer in the back. Lots of cool little detail. There's some dynamite kind of sticking in odd places. Got the Commando Burner Boy. He's got a flamer with the backpack is where he has his fuel. I'm sure that won't make for a tempting target for any sniper boys out there. He's got this cool like welding mask. He's the only one I think with like clearly it's a leather glove. All the others look like it's just their hands. And this will be my first chance, I think, to paint actual flames on a model, which like I said, I haven't done it. Should be an interesting challenge. We've got the Commando Daka Boy, which he has a weapon that looks like a shotgun with a triple barrel for when you absolutely positively have to get those 12 gauge slugs downrange. Really cool looking. This is probably an assault weapon. He's wearing a knit cap. I don't know how to feel about that. I feel a certain way about people who wear knit caps. Anyway, our Ork buddy has it. It looks cool on him, and he's got a pierced nose. I'll allow it. I'll allow it. We've got our last Commando Boy here. He's got the bolt pistol and an axe, and it looks like he's wearing scuba gear. You'll notice his face mask. He's got like a rebreather or some kind of air delivery mechanism, and he's got what looks like what are these called? Like a pneumatic harpoon for underwater ranged combat. Bunch of grenades, some rope, and he's cool. He doesn't wear a shirt. He's just wearing pants with suspenders. This cute little fella here, he's the Commando Grot. I guess he's a Gretchen, but he's somehow got roped into hanging out with these commandos, and he's going to do his best to provide support. He's got, it looks like a grappling hook. I don't know if he has any other weapons, but his backpack is pretty neat. He's got some swimming flippers. There's probably a name for them, and I don't know it. I'm not a scuba guy. He's got a scuba mask. He looks adorable. And last but definitely not least, we have a bomb squig. He's got dynamite. He's got a landmine strapped underneath his chin. He's got some grenades in his mouth, and he's coming to get you. And I think that's like an antenna. I guess he's going to be a remote detonated, I said that weird, detonated bomb squig. He's going to have a bad day, but he's going to have fun getting there. So here they are. It's my gang. I am going to give them a nice paint. They've been primed with some Army Painter skeleton bone, and it's actually it's my second prime. I primed them black originally because I wanted to do some stuff. It didn't turn out right, so after I kind of halfway painted them, I just reprimed them. I figured I'd try this again. As a result, I feel like the details are a little soft. That's okay. I'm going to be a little bit more sparing with the details. These models have a lot of detail, and so you're going to drive yourself crazy if you're going to pick out every single thing. So I'm going to shoot for a simple, clean, but still orky looking color scheme on these guys. And I'm going to start with the foundation of Darkstone. This is a really, really dark brown, and it doesn't necessarily look brown at first glance, but when you thin it up and make it into a glaze, it's very clear. It's a very dark brown, and so this is going to be the base coat for all the skin. Now, these guys are pretty well clothed, so there's not a lot of skin showing, but what skin is there, I want to show off. So starting with our knob here, I'm going to hit this the skin, all the exposed skin. I'm going to hit it with this glaze of dark stone. My particular mix has a moderate amount of flow improver and just a touch of water to thin it down to give me a nice glaze. The idea is I want decent coverage, but I still want a little bit of the prime to show up, the undercoat. I want that to show a little bit. Not a ton, just a bit. And so everything that I decide is exposed skin is going to get that. And on top of that, I'm going to add the usual orky green color. But I want it to have this dark brown base because I think it's going to look really cool for the green to show up as basically the highlights, kind of the midtones. And this dark brown will be like the shadows. I think that'll be a nice touch. So I'm going to do this with all the models, including the squig, because the squig is going to be the same thing, but instead of going over with green later on, I'm going to hit it with some red. But they're all going to have this nice dark brown base. So that's what it looks like with this first coat. Looks creepy AF, but that's okay. It's going to look better. That took a bit, but the skin on all these guys has the kind of the base coat glaze on it, so you can see how it's brown, but you can see a lot of the beige, the skeleton bone that it was primed in, and that's kind of the idea. From here, I'm going to build up the green color, so it's kind of an organic. It looks like it's kind of changing in color as we go away from the shadows. It's a little bit more involved than I usually do, but for organic characters, like when they're not wearing armor, like with skin, I find that I enjoy spending a bit more time with it. But we're not ready to do that yet. There's still a lot of base coating to do. So I think the best approach is just to pick a color, the next color, and I think I'm going to hit the leather stuff. So anything that's going to be leather, like the backpacks. Yeah, I'm going to go with the backpacks and the boots, mostly because the backpacks and the boots are big, chunky pieces, and if I get those out of the way, it'll make the other decisions a little bit easier, I hope. So for the backpacks and the boots, I'm going to go with a nice dark brown. It's the darkest, well, it's the second darkest brown I've got. It's this oak brown. And basically it's just a little less dark than the dark stone, which is what I use to base coat the skin. And so the idea here is I want to keep these pretty dark. These guys are Kommandos, right? So they're like special forces units. They're like the Navy SEALs of the Orky world. And so there's going to be a lot of black. So the uniform is going to be, mostly black with some red accents. But these leather components, I want to pick them out with a natural kind of a natural color. But I want to keep with the dark theme. So I'm going to go with this darkest brown as my base coat glaze and build from there. Now I should point out that some of these models, so they have these little pouches. I'm not going to do that pouch until kind of closer to the end because there's a shirt underneath here that I need to paint, and if I do the pouch, it's going to interfere with the shirt, so I'm going to leave that till after I base coat the shirt. But I'm going to pick these out. Mostly I'm picking out large areas because this is a large, complicated model in terms of painting. And so there's lots of little decisions that you have to make, and they can be a little overwhelming because I don't know, I'm using more colors on the models than I typically do, and so I want to kind of cut down on the cognitive load. I want to make progress so that I don't get bogged down and I don't get tempted to just stop, you know? It's one of the things I noticed my first time around with these models is that there's just so many things to paint that it's easy to just, you know, put it off, procrastinate. So I'm just tackling the big areas, and by the time you know it, I'll be just touching on the little small stuff and it'll be done. That's the plan anyway. I hope it works out. So I've got my backpacks all set up, and so now I'm going to choose the next big color block to paint up, and that's going to be anything that's going to be black. So I'm talking guns, melee weapons, equipment, that sort of thing, and that's all going to be black. I'm also going to blacken up the pants. If they're wearing any shirts, they'll also be black. Any like overcoats, like stuff like that, I'll kind of play it by ear. I might want to use the accent color that's going to be red. The important thing to note is that I'm not actually going to use black. I'm going to use my proxy black, which is Necromancer Cloak. It's a very dark gray. It's the darkest gray that I've got. Mixed up a glaze of this, my usual recipe, mostly paint, a bit of flow improver, and some water to make it nice and thin so that I can see the base coat underneath it. And once I apply this, right, so I don't actually want gray, I want black. But more importantly, I want it to look black. And so in order to make it look black with my kind of painting approach, I actually need to use gray, because once the black base coat goes on, I go up and darken it up with some dark wash. And so the combination of the dark gray and the dark wash, it actually produces a black looking color with shadows and highlights, which is exactly why I use my quick painting kind of approach, because that's what I want. So I'm going to keep it nice and simple. Everything that's supposed to be metallic, I'm going to hit it with black or this gray, and I've got quite a bit of it, so it's going to be a little bit, but just kind of get in there. Once I have this taken care of, then I'll decide on what the colors should actually be like in terms of the details. I just want to get my base coat set in. So the base coat on these guys is done, and they look pretty shabby. And that's fine. They're supposed to look kind of shabby at this point because this very next step, which is the washing step, is going to start helping this liven up. And so the plan is to darken up as much of this as possible. And I'm going to start with the black stuff. So right now, my metal bits are really dark gray. I'm going to darken them up with some dark tone from Army Painter. And so this should help darken up that gray so that it starts looking black. And it'll also start providing some of the shadows and some of the highlights so that we don't have to do this manually. And I'm going to do the same thing with the orc skin and the leather bits, but I'm going to start with the black just because there's so much of it. And you know, it's at that ugly phase of the model, and I want it to stop looking ugly, because when it looks ugly, it can be a little demotivating. So this should help start giving it some life. Now this is going to look a little strange, right? Because the metal parts are black, but so are the clothes. And it's going to look really, really similar for a little bit until some of the later stages. At the later stages, I'll start kind of differentiating the cloth black from the metal black. I have a special thing in mind that'll help us in that regard to the future steps. So for now, it's going to stay looking kind of the same, and that's going to be okay. So already, with just that very first pass of the dark wash, the grays are no longer really looking great. Now they're looking pretty black. But you can see some variations in the black on the gun and on the mask, and that's kind of the plan. That's how we get this to look good without spending a ton of time on it. So I'm going to do this very same thing with all the other models. Now that the dark tone has dried up on the gray, it looks really nice. It looks a lot closer to black than it was before, and it does have that patchiness, the shadows and highlights that I was looking for. So it's a really good start. It's a really good indication that my approach is going to work here. So the next thing is to do the same thing with the backpacks, and for that I'm going to use the strong tone, not the dark tone. So I want a nice dark wash, but I do want it to be brown instead of the black of the dark tone. So I'm going to do this with all of my little orc boys here to make sure that the leather bits look like nice dark leather. And I'm also going to do the same thing to any orc skin. I kind of debated which wash to use on the orc skin because I do want those really dark shadows before I add other layers on top, but I did want to accentuate the brown of that. So on all the faces and all the arms, any exposed skin, I'm going to hit it with the very same strong tone in preparation for other steps. So the base coat and the glaze is all done for all these dudes, and it looks pretty good. The leather looks nice and leathery, the skin looks nice and dark, the blacks look nice and black. I'm pretty happy with the results so far, but I spent a lot of time getting all that stuff taken care of because you want to get the base coat on first on all the major areas. You know, you can skip out the details, like here I left out the ropes, I haven't decided what color that's going to be, some details like the little tooth there, but all the major areas have to be based before you can glaze because you want them to look all the same at the end. And so that's all done, and I'm pretty happy with it. But you'll notice that while they look decent, they don't look like orcs. That is to say, there's not a spot of green on them. The only one that has any kind of color is the knob. He's rocking this red vest, which kind of flies in the face of the tactical black that they've got going on otherwise. But he's the knob. He can do what he wants, right? He's going to be a flashy guy. So how do we go from mass of like brown to orcs? Well, this is how. We've got our trusty little dry brush here, and we're going to pick out one of our dudes, and we're going to hit them with one of these two paints. So this is Army Green and this is Goblin Green. So I'm going to use this as kind of the first pass. And by first pass, I mean I'm going to do a dry brush, but kind of a generous dry brush. I don't want to just do like a little bit. I want it to get most of the arm, but I'm going to dry brush because I want like there's going to be lines for the muscles and stuff like that, where their shadows are supposed to go, I want that stuff to stay that color brown. And so I think that a dry brush is going to do the job pretty nicely. And so, very carefully, I'll just start hitting this with some green, and you'll start seeing that in fact the arm starts looking kind of green. I'll zoom in and do this other side to get a better idea of what I'm doing. And so I'm just dry brushing the skin with this green. And I'm being careful because I don't want the green to get on any of the leather or any of the other parts. I just want it to be like on the surface of the skin. I don't want it to get into the muscular ridges. So there we start getting some of that green over that brown, and I think it looks pretty cool. I do think I need a bit more green though, because it's a pretty dull green. And once I have this green flesh tone exactly where I want it, I'm going to go over this with another dry brush of a slightly lighter green to give the muscles some extra highlights. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Just going to want to let you know that that's the plan. But I've got a lot of dry brushing to go before I get to that part of the plan. So I think that's where I want to leave that initial layer of green. And now he looks a lot more orky, but he also looks like, I don't know, it looks like a realistic green color. I don't know. I like the way it looks. I am a fan of this approach. So I'm going to do the same thing with the others. Now I'm going to alternate between this army green. I'm going to alternate between this army green and this goblin green to lay out the initial layer of green on each of these models. So roughly half will get this, roughly half will get the other one, and that way I'll have some variability in the color of the flesh of these guys. This is what they look like after the dry brush. So you can tell I've got two different kinds of grain on here. We've got these two orcs, and they're both green, but you can kind of tell that they're different shades. One of these is brighter green, the other one is kind of a more tan, kind of a more subdued green. And so I've got about 5 of each of my orcs like that. The knob has that brighter green. I wanted it to contrast with that red, and I think it looks pretty good. But we're going to give it one last layer of dry brushing with a slightly different color. That's where these two colors come in. We've got scaly hide and aquatic flesh. They're really light shades of green, and the plan is I'm going to just kind of randomly pick 5 of these. Hopefully get a mixture of the 2 different types of green. And then I'm going to hit each of them with a little bit of that second green, and the other kind of green, I'll hit the other 5 models, and that way I'll have basically some highlights. So in the dry brush, I'm just going to very lightly dry brush here. So it's a lot less of a dry brush than I had before. So my first pass was kind of a dense dry brush. This is a less dense dry brush. The idea here is to leave behind some highlights. Kind of in the places that kind of face the light. So it's a quick and easy highlight rather than a hard manual highlight. And so that's what that looks like. So I'll repeat this process with each of my colors, and I should have a nice variation of green on all of my orky boys. So they finally look like actual orcs. Yeah, now they're looking proper orky, I think. It's an interesting shade of green that they've got. So here's the knob. You can see both shades of green represented on his skin. It contrasts pretty nicely, but not like very brightly. So these guys aren't what I would call cartoony. They're kind of a, I don't know, it's kind of a realistic, I think, skin tone, and that's what I was going for. So they look a little bit more muted, maybe a little less cartoony. Of course, that means I'm going to have to do some touch-ups. There's a couple of patches of green that I didn't intend to. Dry brushing kind of got away from me a little bit, but that's okay. I can fill in some details later. But I think they look pretty cool. The next step is going to be doing the same thing, but with all the metal bits. So helmets, guns, etc., etc. I'm going to give them a nice little dry brush of gunmetal. It's this guy right here from Army Painter. And so the idea is I'm not only going to give these a nice metallic shine, but it's going to help me distinguish the black of the weapons, of all the metal bits, from the black of the outfits. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to start with this power claw, and I'm just going to hit it kind of like so. So it gives it a metallic sheen, but it's not overpowering and it's not silver. It just gives it a nice little sparkle, and it kind of looks like wear, and you can do it to all these metal pieces without being overly metallic. And if you're nice and gentle with it, your weapons look like they're black metal, but they also have like a wear pattern, which I think is pretty neat looking. So now, because I've done it to all the metal pieces, but not the pants, they're going to look a little different. And I think the difference will be a little bit more noticeable once I hit it with some matte varnish. But for now, it's a good choice, I think. Guys are in some pretty decent shape after all the basing and washing. So now it's time to start adding some details. And so there's not a ton that I want to add. I want to be very selective about this because these models are very, very detailed, and so I could be here for days picking up details and, you know, maybe not really making the model look better, just more noisy and spending more time on it. So I'm going to pick out a few things, like, for example, I'm going to start picking out the cabling. So some of these cables have insulation. So I'm going to pick out that insulation with bright green. And this can be done if you have some heavy glaze left over, or you can just kind of reload your wet palette with some relatively unthinned paint. Because you want these to be pretty bright and stand out. You don't want them necessarily to blend into their surroundings. You want to pick them out and make them look considerably different from the model it's on. I'm also going to start picking out the eyes, or in some cases the goggles. So I'm going to start undercoating with an off-white, because I want to do a yellow eye or goggle thing. And so I feel like I need to undercoat so that the yellow shows up. And I'm using a really thin brush because in the past I've done a kind of a poor job of getting at the eyes, and I want to do a better job. We also want to hit up any of these little straps, these leather straps that we either didn't get to initially or that we've had to cover up for one reason or the other. Sometimes that's the only way to paint really small details, is to just run over some other stuff next to it. And so we just want to touch those up, make sure that you can pick them out. So there's a lot of bandoliers on backpacks and stuff like that you want to pick out, but there's also some bandoliers on chests and things like that. And these have an interesting detail in that some of the slots where the rounds go are actually empty. So you want to, point those out wherever you can. I think that's a good idea. If you have a steady enough hand, you don't have to get that done, but I think it's a good little touch. Another detail that I want to add is the flames, and this is the only model in this collection that has open flames. So I'm just going to go with a bit of yellow, and that's going to be the first kind of layer, and I'm going to go over it with some orange and some reds just to kind of let the color gradually change from yellow to red. And the pilot light down here, I think it's going to be more of a blue. I'm also going to smoke it up a bit, so I'm going to try a little harder on this flame to make it look nice. It's such an eye-catching piece of the model. Another thing that I want to do is to start prepping the weapons for just a little bit of detail. So the weapons are, they're monolithically kind of metallic black, but I want to spice them up a little bit, right? Since they're the most important part of the model, I want them to catch the eye a little bit more. So I'm going to add a few details. So like the nose cones on missiles, or in this case rockets, I'm going to undercoat them in white, or this off-white that I have on my palette, and once that dries I'll go over it with some bright red so that they really stand out. And so I'll do stuff like that. Also, some of these weapons have insignias on them, and so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to mark them out, undercoat them with a little bit of white, so that I can mark them out in red. So I'm going to use red as my accent color. Not everywhere, but just in certain spots, just to kind of make sure that they pop. In fact, I probably want to do the same thing with the barrels of all the weapons. Where the weapons have barrels, I'm going to make them red as well. But first, they get an undercoating of white, so that the red, when I'm ready for it, pops out really nicely. Also, this thing right here is a scope, so I'm going to undercoat that to receive the color I normally do for scopes. May not be a bad idea to do the same thing with the heads of these grenades. Just so it's clear that they're there, any chance to introduce a bit of color, a little bit of visual interest, but all of these are optional. Depends on how much level of detail you want to include, and how comfortable you are with these small things. And let's not forget how much time you have to devote to this, because it takes a little bit of time, especially if you want to do it carefully. So embellish your models to your heart's content, or to the limitations of whatever constraints you face. With this kit, you won't have a lot of opportunity to paint in orc teeth. I think this is the only model that has teeth. Well, the only orc model that has teeth. Now, all these red bits need a little bit of wash, and I'm going to use a dark wash, but The color that you choose is up to you. I just want to make sure it's nice and dark so that it matches kind of the look and feel of all the other parts of this model. There's just a few more things left to do. As you can see, I've gone ahead and painted up all these little accessories. There's a couple of big old knives. There's a couple of holsters with pistols on them. A couple of grenades and a couple of pouches. And I've painted these up kind of the same way I would have done anything else. I did the glaze, and I did some washing, and that's really about it. That's really all you need. These did have a fair number of details, so I went ahead and added them in there just because, you know, if I'm going through the effort of making these, I might as well make them look as cool as I possibly can. And so now I've got to glue these on to selected models. And I don't have a plan, it's just going to be for maximum fun. At long last, here are my orc buddies. They're painted. I slapped a quick base on them, and I did a little matte varnish, and they're complete. They were pretty detailed. I really enjoyed this, but it did take some effort to complete. Certainly much more than the Deathcore of Krieg set that came in this box. But they're not bad for my first orc entry. I really enjoyed the look of the skin tone, the way the Drybrush gives it kind of some layers, some shadows, and it's I think it's visually more interesting than the other approach, although that's probably something to test out in a future video if I ever decide to do more orc models. Yeah, so there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of opportunities to make these guys look pretty neat, and you know, making liberal use of washing over the Basecoat Glaze leaves your model looking pretty good with relatively minimal effort. And the amount of details that you pick out for your models, that's, you know, completely up to you. It's a matter of personal preference and what your objectives are. And they have just a lot of character. There's a lot of charm to these guys, and you know, there's a lot of variability, a lot of opportunity to kind of experiment a little bit with what you're doing. It's a really good kit. I really enjoyed it. It was relatively easy to put together. Yeah, I can't recommend it enough. If you're interested in Kill Team at all, or if you're interested in adding a few orcs to your collection, this is not a bad kit to start with. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you picked up a few tips, a few lessons to apply to your models to get them on the tabletop a little quicker and looking a little nicer than you otherwise might have done. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other.